Welcome to another episode of Pack the Rock podcast. As always, it's Liv, Will, Nick, and Ava, and it is IU's homecoming weekend. IU is 6-0, but let's look at the Big Ten Conference. So when you guys see the Big Ten Conference, it's still looking wildly stacked. Oregon and OSU just went against each other. And so how do you guys feel about the Big Ten so far? It's looking pretty strong.
It's not as top-heavy as I thought it was. At least, you look at the teams at the very top, you still have Oregon. I'd still put Ohio State up there because they were a botched final drive away from winning that game in Eugene. Penn State squeaked by USC, but there's no such thing as a bad win on the road, especially in the Big Ten. I don't know about Illinois, though. I don't know what was going on in Champaign. I know Purdue has had their number there over the last 10 years, but man, you give up 49 points to that offense and to a team whose fans were calling for its head coach to be fired. I don't know. I didn't think Illinois should be ranked. I don't think Michigan should be ranked either. I know they're coming off a bye week, but with Jack Tuttle at quarterback, I don't feel confident in anything they're doing right now. Rutgers definitely took a step back. This is a year where, they're not in the Big Ten East anymore either, and they got walloped at home by Wisconsin. Maybe that's Wisconsin being better than we thought, but Rutgers definitely took a step back. But there are 3 or 4 teams at the top, and weirdly, Indiana, as of right now, is still up there. So it's interesting to see.
Well,
Nick covered most of the bases there, I would say. With Wisconsin, though, I think they're better than we thought from what I've seen on tape. Obviously, they smacked Purdue, which was to be expected when you're at home. And they didn't look great against Bama, but it's a middle-of-the-table Big Ten team against the top-tier SEC team. I wouldn't
call Bama top tier.
I would. That's insane.
I wouldn't.
I'm not gonna lie, that's crazy.
They barely squeaked by South Carolina at home,
which was a pathetic watch.
Yes.
That's fair enough. But
yes.
That's still insane. Anyways, that's not the topic of this conversation.
I don't know. Call me crazy.
Wisconsin's better than I think.
Yeah.
Nick's crazy because Bama's still a top tier program. Can we please establish that? But otherwise, yeah. The Big Ten is strong, or the second best conference in football, and weirdly enough, Indiana's still at the top of the conference. So
when you guys look at it, you see Indiana, Oregon, Penn, Illinois, Ohio, all right there at the top. Do you guys see a lot of those teams in playoff talk, in conference playoff talk, or do we really, are most of the people, Ava, you're shaking your head, is it mostly probably people are just saying Oregon and OSU, or do you see a couple other Big Ten teams falling in there?
I see Oregon falling in there. That's all I have to say about that.
Oh,
that's it?
I see Oregon falling in there. I'll give it to Ohio State. They really did lose to Oregon on a bad driver too, and I don't see why. I guess they wouldn't make it in there. Still not a fan of Penn State. Still not a fan of Penn State.
I can't blame you.
I
cannot fault
did
you.
not. Yeah, I don't see Penn State making it, and I don't see Illinois and Nebraska making it either.
And
yeah,
so,
I
you
think
feel the same, Nick?
Yeah, I think Illinois and Nebraska are out at this point, out of the conversation.
Yeah,
I don't trust Nebraska because Dylan Raiola is a true freshman, and true freshmen historically, it's very tough for them, especially now with a bunch of 25-year-old dinosaurs in college football. Like the average age has gone so high that
crazy.
It's tough. Illinois, I think, they almost outcoached themselves into a loss against Purdue, and Purdue is one of the worst teams in the conference. So as for the playoff, I don't trust James Franklin in big games. I think that's been well established. So maybe they make it as an 11 seed, but if they do, they lose their first game. Ohio State still very much in the conversation. Oregon, if they continue playing at this level, I think they're a lock as long as their receivers don't spit on opposing defensive backs. I think they'll be okay. Indiana's still in the conversation. I think if they beat Nebraska, then we can start talking about it because Washington's not very good and Michigan's in a down year. So it's very much still a possibility Indiana gets into the playoff as a 9 seed, a 10 seed, something like that. They win the Big Ten championship. Who knows? You're playing with house money. But yeah, I'd say Ohio State, Oregon, the favorites, Penn State on the fringe, but James Franklin in a big game. I don't know. I don't trust him.
And so you talk about Indiana, which I think is interesting, is they're number 1 in the Big Ten. And usually when you think of like a number 1 team in their conference, you're like, oh yeah, like they're definitely going to the playoffs. But for Indiana, is it that win to Nebraska that they really need, or will it need to be more actually after that?
It's going to need to be more. I mean, beating Nebraska at home, which is a team that has lost their only ranked matchup at home, is not good enough to be like, oh, yeah, that's a playoff lock at that point, right? No, not even close. I would say they have to go 11-1 to even be considered for the playoff. They have to beat Michigan at home because they're going to be higher ranked than Michigan, if Michigan's even ranked by the time they're here in November. Washington, like we said, not a great team. Michigan State, not exactly a great team by any stretch. And then their one test is Ohio State. That's the one thing on the resume that it has to be, I would say, within a 3-point game for it to not be a total loss and them still to be considered for the playoff. Because you got to think about it otherwise. The strength of schedule is not going to look great on paper. They've had so many home games that it's going to be almost expected wins at that point with how talented this team has played. So I would say they have to go 11-1 to even be considered.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
And you think about 2020, Indiana was, I think, 9th or 11th in the final CFP rankings that year.
Yeah, that sounds
And
right.
the only loss they had was a close game at Ohio State. And I know that game was not played in front of fans, but if, we can hypothesize all day. But Indiana,
Especially with that season,
yeah, Indiana was a couple self-inflicted wounds away from winning at Ohio State, and that Ohio State team went to the college football playoff. So I think it's possible that if you play Ohio State close, which it's tough because they're a very talented team, even though they lost, it was very clear that they're one of the most stacked teams in the country. You play them close, play them to a 3-point, 7-point game. You're showing that you can hang with the big boys, and I think that's big. So, yeah, if they get blown out at the Horseshoe, then...
Yeah, that's going to be a tough look.
Yeah, you lose by 21, 28. It's tough to make a case, but, you play them close. Maybe you get them again in Indianapolis in the Big Ten Championship. A lot of things can happen. It's college football. It's very chaotic. So it's definitely on the table, but there's a lot of time between now and then. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
So you feel like even if they keep that game close to Nebraska but lose, they won't drop too far in the rankings? Or do we see them still kind of hovering between that 15 and 18 rank?
If they lose at home to Nebraska, that's not going to be a good look. That's going to be like Nebraska losing at home to Illinois.
Yeah.
And it might honestly just tank them all the way out. I wouldn't be surprised if that does. Even if it's like a 3 to 5 point loss at home, I think that still tanks their ranking. So, I mean, it's win or don't even consider the college playoff from here to the end of the season.
Oof, Jesus. Okay, so let's look into Nebraska. Okay, so yes, IU's homecoming this weekend. Big noon kickoff. It'll be huge. So Nebraska's coming in 5-1, 2-1 in the conference, 4th in the Big Ten. When you guys see this team, what's like initial thoughts? Do you see weaknesses off the gate? Do you see strengths off the gate? Is that offense? Is it that defense? What should IU be looking for when they come into this game?
Well, Kurt Signetti talked about it yesterday. They're extremely physical up front, both sides of the ball. They have one of the best scoring defenses in the conference. Their offense leaves a liturt bit to be desired, only 28 points per game, which is top 10 in the conference, but, middle of the pack. They haven't separated themselves in that way. Kurt Signetti said it. It's true. Dylan Raiola, true freshman quarterback, very talented. But I think at the same time, you look at how many rushing yards he has, and college football is stupid because they count sacks against rushing yards. But he has negative 78 rushing yards, which translates to he takes a lot of sacks. And you can blame some of that on your offensive line, but I think part of it is, too, if the quarterback's holding onto the ball for too long, trying to create something when he should just throw the ball away, that's not going to be great. And I think Nebraska's strength is in their defense. They lead the Big Ten in sacks, tackles for loss, second in scoring defense to Ohio State, at least before the Oregon game. It's very clear that their defense is what drives them, and I think that gives an advantage to Indiana because you're playing at home. This is a sellout. And I know Nebraska fans will say, oh, well, we sold the game out. Actually, they didn't even sell out their own ticket allotment. And Indiana just sold out the Michigan game. So I guess we should thank Nebraska fans for that, too. But no, I think Indiana's defense will feed off this sellout crowd. And it's going to be very tough for Dylan Raiola. I think this is going to be the biggest test that he's had. It's his first game on the road against a ranked team. And I think that that's going to be a huge advantage for this veteran Indiana defense. Very physical. They play nasty. They play tough. It's going to be difficult, I think, for Nebraska to get anything going.
I mean, when you look at his stats for Dylan Raiola, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, sacked 12 times. Is this a quarterback IU should still be worried about, or should it be, like Nick said, that defense?
I think I think the defense. I think a good defense it wins you football games. You got to have a good defense, and that is what Nebraska has. I mean, don't rule out the quarterback. Don't. But he is a true freshman. He is young. I said it on something before the season started that this Nebraska team has a lot of young pieces to it and a lot to figure out, and their success is going to be based on the matter of time in which they can figure it out. And I think they have figured some of that out, but not all of that out, and that youngness to them is going to, I think, hurt them a little bit sometimes in this game, but I think for Indiana, it's looking at that defense.
Yeah, I mean, you got a point. That defense is going to be the number one factor in this game. If Indiana's offense can't get rolling on it, then it's going to be an issue. And Nebraska's offense has capitalized on it in the past. It's still one of the top scoring offenses in the Big Ten with, Mahomes Jr., Raiola, whatever you want to call him.
Apartments.
What now?
Condominium. Not quite a home, just an apartment.
Oh, wait. I got that one.
Apartment. Okay, that was pretty good. That might be the best thing you've said.
I'll be here all week.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you still got to worry about the defense, and Raiola can capitalize off turnovers. They've done it so far this year. They're one of the best teams capitalizing off turnovers so far. It's just going to be, the youth in that team. And not to mention, Rule hasn't exactly coached in hostile environments, or when he has, it has been great turnouts, apart from the Colorado game, which is weirdly, they have Colorado's number, which is just kind of hilarious to me.
I think, especially last year, I don't know. Colorado, I think, is still very overrated.
Probably that too,
but
yeah.
Don't let the national media hear that, because they love Coach Prime.
Nick has just blackballed himself from a job.
Oh,
anyway,
no, not Colorado.
Well, but it's interesting because you look at Nebraska and their only loss was against Illinois in overtime. Why do you guys feel like they still aren't ranked?
Because of that loss at home against Illinois would be my assumption.
What hurts them is that it was at home. And
yeah, it's bad. Yeah.
Illinois gave up 49 points to Purdue. And they needed overtime, and they needed a game-tying field goal at the end of regulation before overtime to beat Purdue in Champaign. Dylan Raiola in that game, especially late, made a lot of bad decisions with the ball, and I think that's where his youth comes in. It's obvious he's very talented, but when the game is on the line, I would rather have somebody like Curtis Rourke all day, because he threw 2 early interceptions against Maryland, and Kurt Cignetti said it. He never felt like Curtis was going to, waver. He never felt like his confidence was going to drop. He trusted him to come back because he's proven he can do it. He can handle adversity. Dylan Raiola in that game didn't prove that he can handle adversity. And you look at, who else has, we can say the same thing about Indiana. Who else has Nebraska played besides Illinois? They held Rutgers without a rushing touchdown. They've held every team without a rushing touchdown this year. But outside of that, Colorado, UTEP, Northern Iowa, and Purdue, not needle movers. So that's why they're not ranked. And if they beat Indiana, they'll fly back into the top 25, but then they go to Ohio State a week later. So
yikes.
They'll probably be one and done if they do end up ranked. But rankings don't mean much anyway, but definitely a strength of schedule thing.
And so when Indiana, going into this bye week, what do you think the main focus was for this bye week, going into Nebraska, from fixing anything they saw from the beginning of the season from the first half?
It sounded like it was more a relaxation thing, if anything. Rest, relaxation, recover. That was what Cignetti kind of harped on when we were leaving Evanston. And it's what it seemed like when he was doing his media tour of Bloomington this week, which was hilarious to watch. But I don't think there was really anything that they talked about working on. He hadn't seen anything on film from the last time he spoke. I don't know if he said anything on Monday specifically about it, but it sounded like it was a lot of just rest, relaxation, and kind of recovery for the guys. It's been 6 straight weeks of hard-nosed Big Ten football, and it was time for a break. I mean, it's right in the middle of the season, perfectly scheduled. So, I think it was just an off week for the guys and kind of recoup, get back into football, and take a minute off.
Does that bye week help Indiana, or do you think that could slow down the momentum they were having with those 6 games? Does it kind of put a halt in the games they were going, or was this needed?
I'd say it was needed. It was definitely, like I said, it's been 6 weeks of hard-nosed football for these guys, and they've been putting up 30, 40 points a game straight, and it's been tough on them. I mean, there's been little injuries here and there. Jalen Walker was the big one 2 weeks ago, and he's been able to recover for 2 weeks. He should be back for Saturday, which is a key piece of this defense. Obviously, it's not Fish calling the plays, but Walker still does his part, and it's very noticeable if you even watch the game for about 5 minutes. So It was a huge bye week for them, and it's not going to hurt their momentum. If anything, it's going to help because those guys had 2 weeks to look at their phones and see everyone hyping them up on social media. So it could hurt them in that way that they're not humble and hungry 24/7. But I don't think it's going to hurt their momentum at all.
And Nick, how do you feel?
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of baseball, where we talked about with the MLB playoffs. Oh, a team goes on a bye, they lose their mojo, and then a red hot team rolls in with momentum, having not had any rest, and they wallop them. And it's kind of the opposite, I think, especially with injuries like to Jalen Walker, one of the few injuries we've seen. Coach Signetti said yesterday he expects Jalen Walker to be full speed on Saturday. I think the bye week is huge. I mean, if they don't have that extra week of rest, I don't know that we're talking about Jalen Walker playing on Saturday, which would be a huge loss for Indiana. So definitely, I think it's helpful. Football is a very physical game, and especially now with all the travel, Indiana's been fortunate to have a lot of home games, but I think the travel still takes a toll. So for them to get rested going into this game, Nebraska's the same way. They're coming off a home game and then a bye week, so it's going to be very, I think, level. We're going to get a really good look at how Indiana fares against their toughest competition so far this season, and both teams are going to be rested, so I think that's good.
And Indiana will have a sold-out crowd, which is going to be insane. But we're all going to be there. Duh. And so what do you guys think that game will look like? Fourth quarter, final score, just to send it off into homecoming weekend. Will, do you want to go first?
I think it's going to look like 3 weeks ago when it was just rowdy as can be. And it was, on the field, it was electric. It was raining and it was horrible outside, but it was still maybe one of the funnest environments I've ever seen on this campus. I think Indiana's going to win again. I think it's going to be like 27-24 if it even gets up that high with these two defenses. But it's going to be close, and it's going to be a fun Big Ten battle at home for homecoming weekend.
There we go. Ava.
I mean, I agree with Will. I think it's going to be loud and rowdy. I have friends going to the game who have expressed to me all week. They're like, I'm so excited. And they don't care about football like that. So, you're getting the attention of people who have maybe not paid attention to football before, but they feel the excitement that the community and the fans feel about this team, and now they're like, okay, I'm excited to go watch this football team and see what it's about, see what I've been seeing on social media is like legit. And so I think that the environment is going to be insane, and I'm very excited to be there, very excited to just see all that plays out. I do see Indiana winning this one if they can break through that Nebraska defense. Prediction? I don't know. Nebraska, low-key Nebraska, maybe like 28, and IU, oh gosh, something in the 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Nick.
I'm not a betting man, but if I was,
I like how you start with that. Let's just clarify.
If I
he is under
was-
21. This isn't gambling advice.
I would not bet on the over being hit in this game, because these are two of the best defenses in the conference. And I think it's going to be run first for both teams, especially Nebraska, because you establish the run, then you can go to the air and try to take the crowd out of it. Indiana, though, I think they kind of do what they did against FIU, where, and I know comparing Nebraska to FIU is weird.
That was insane.
But remember, they went pass first, went 3 and out with, I think, 3 straight incompletions on that first drive. Then they went to the run and they found their rhythm. I think it's going to be similar. This week, I think it's going to be low scoring. It's going to be physical. It's the biggest game since Cincinnati 2021, and a targeting call really kind of derailed that game. I don't see that happening this time because this team is more even keeled. They don't let the highs affect them too much, and they don't let the lows affect them too much. I think it's going to be tough, like Big Ten West football, but without all the punts. So I'm going to say Indiana 21-10. I think it's tough for Dylan Raiola and Nebraska to get anything going. Indiana's going to force Nebraska to beat them through the air. I think Indiana's too good up front to let the run beat them. And on the other side, I think the run's going to help them. So yeah, Indiana 21-10. I think a touchdown pass seals it late. Curtis Rourke to, let's say, Keyshawn Williams. Indiana by 11.
For anyone curious, the over-under is 50.5. So Nick's prediction's way under
50 and a
that.
half.
Anyways, this isn't gambling advice. This is not. Let's just
not.
clarify that, by the way.
But yeah, 50 and a half for two of the best defenses in the conference is curious.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I had Indiana 28 and then Nebraska 14. That's what I feel.
Oh, you don't even think it's close.
No.
Whoa.
I feel like low scoring game, but I also just feel like Indiana's going to find the rhythm, just like Nick said. I feel like it'll be good. I feel like Indiana will figure it out. And that home crowd's going to be insane. So everyone should be there. Saturday, big noon kickoff, Indiana, Nebraska. It will all be there. And we'll see you next week for another episode of Pack the Rock podcast.